The program you are about to see contains testimony of actual abusers and true stories of survivors based on real cases of child sexual abuse. The content may be disturbing. It may bring about strong reactions. If you feel the need to excuse yourself, you are encouraged to return to the second half of the program to learn the 5 steps for preventing and addressing abuse. If you feel you are unable to continue, please communicate with your facilitator or coordinator. We all value the protection of children and youth. Children are the hope of our future. Every smile from a child is a precious gift. They come to us with open hearts, with a trust so honest it brings joy and lights our lives. All children deserve to have happy and healthy childhoods. As adults, it is our immense privilege and responsibility to nurture and guide them through their journey to adulthood. It is a privilege for caring adults to keep a child as safe as possible. Although this training primarily focuses on children and youth, what you learn here can also be applied to addressing other vulnerable populations, such as vulnerable adults who could include those who are physically, emotionally, or developmentally disabled. Thank you for being here. Together, we are making a difference in the lives of people who cannot always protect themselves. Every employee and volunteer in child-serving environments must be committed to working together to protect children and youth, and this program is here to show you how to do that. But first, we cannot expect to protect the children and youth in our care unless we bring the reality of child sexual abuse out into the open. We know too well that there are those who harm children and youth in order to meet their own selfish interests. And if no one stops them, they will continue to cause harm. Abuse can happen wherever there are children and youth present, even in the most trusted environments.
When I was young, I was sexually abused by a man who was a dear friend to my parents. It went from a mentoring type of relationship that ended up being some of the worst years of my life. He was held in high regard within our community. And because my parents really trusted him, I didn't think my parents would believe me. So I didn't tell my family or my friends. In fact, I didn't say anything for 30 years.
I love sports, you know? I wanted to go pro. I still do. I really thought I could make it. He said I could too. Coach told me, "You got this." Yeah, look at me now. After what happened to me, nobody would want me.
Everywhere children, youth, and vulnerable adults gather, there is the potential for victimization, including the ever-evolving virtual world of the internet. A significant characteristic of technology-facilitated victimization is that victims often fail to identify themselves as having been victimized. Due to the manipulation of the abuser, they frequently feel they are in love with the molester or the molester is a good friend.
I was in middle school when I first met Mike online. He became my best friend. Actually, I loved him, and I thought he loved me. What he did to me really hurt. I used to talk to Mike online every day, and even on the phone. Mike asked me out several times, and eventually I agreed, and we went out. Mike had told me he was 17, and he even sent me pictures of himself. But when I actually met him, he looked a lot older. Still, we went on our date and everything was fine until the ride back to my school. where Mike was going to drop me off so my parents wouldn't find out.
These are not isolated cases. Research repeatedly shows that the number of survivors who have experienced child sexual abuse is alarming.
Well, between 5 and 10% of adult men say they were molested as kids, and the number is 20% for adult women.
Child sexual abuse can include a range of physical and non-physical actions. Touching a child anywhere on their body in a sexual manner or forcing a child to touch the private parts of an adult is child sexual abuse. Non-touching behaviors include voyeurism, such as trying to look at a youth's naked body, or exhibitionism, meaning exposing one's genitalia, or showing a child pornographic images.
Child sexual abuse is a significant and pervasive problem, and child sexual abuse is not new. Child advocacy centers and reporting hotlines have seen abused children come from every environment: schools, daycares, youth-serving organizations, sports, in homes amongst family and caretakers and babysitters, and from every type of church.
He would always talk to my mom and me at church, and my mom always thought he was so nice. And yeah, he'd have me over to his house to play with his kids and spend the night. And before bedtime, he always wanted me to take a bath. And then he'd start. And I couldn't move. You know, I tried to scream or do something, I just couldn't do anything, you know? And so what I did was I tried to distract myself by looking at different things like the faucet on the bathtub, or, you know, the little cracks on the walls. I just like look at the cracks in the walls, or I look behind, try to imagine what's behind the cracks in the walls, just to get my mind off of it, just to get my mind out of my body for a minute. And then he'd leave, and I'd go to bed, shivering, and I'd try to fall asleep just to forget about it all, but I couldn't.
Everybody knew Coach and liked him. To us guys, he was like a pal, like one of us. He treated us like we were grown-ups. We did all kinds of stuff with him. I mean, he let us go to his house and drink with him. We told him everything. He really seemed like he was one of us. But then things changed. He started to single me out, paying more attention to me, asking me to go to his house by myself, and then that's when he started messing around with me.
It seems as though every day there is another story in the news of a child sexually abused by someone known and trusted. The abuser can be a coach, a teacher, a friend of the parents, family, a member of the clergy, a male or female, or even another child. Ronnie was finally apprehended when he was 36, with more than 30 victims. He was 10 years old when he first abused a 5-year-old boy.
He was a neighborhood child who looked up to me, and I took advantage of that to lure him into a field behind our parents' house and trick him, manipulate him, force him to take his clothes off.
Carl victimized many children over his lifetime, as many as 500.
Some of the things I did to get the kids to trust me was just being their buddy. Plus, I was the guy from the church, so there was no reason they had not to trust me when I would say, well, come here and sit in my lap.
I was in 7th grade, and I wasn't doing very well in English class. So my teacher would keep me after class to help me. And then she started hugging me and kissing me. And then she finally I kept thinking that if I was a better student, then she wouldn't have done that. Or if I hadn't stayed after class. I know now that I was wrong in thinking that it wasn't my fault. But how is a 12-year-old supposed to know that?
Children often feel blindsided and confused by the manipulation done to them, whether it is in person or through the internet.
While providing almost limitless positive opportunities for youth to learn and socialize, the internet can also provide another avenue of access for child abusers. A child molester can use a computer or a smartphone to roam online from gaming sites to social networking platforms looking for children and teens susceptible to victimization. Children may be at risk of victimization and exploitation, possibly exposing them to sexting, pornography, sexual solicitations, and even human trafficking. Online, the abuser does not even have to be physically present to groom the youth or arrange a meeting to further sexually exploit them in person.
When Mike pulled into the parking lot, I started to get out of his van, but he wouldn't let me. He started to do things I didn't want him to do. I told him to stop, but he told me that this is what people do when they love each other. What he did to me really hurt. When I walked home that night, I was crying.
At first, I was really happy that I joined the team. Everybody knew Coach and everybody liked him. He was like a hero because his teams were always winning. Coach told me I was good and that I could be even better with a lot of work. But I needed his help. I believed him and I was ready. I thought I wanted to do whatever I could to become the best. And he did help me be better. My parents were so proud that he showed interest in me. They said, hey, dreams do come true. And it really seemed like mine were. I trusted him. We all did. Then one day after practice, he called me into his office. Told me that with hard work, I could become team captain. Wow, man, I was on cloud 9.
Some child molesters are very appealing, socially gifted people. They win over congregations, they win over neighbors, they win over families, they even win over the kids themselves. They can be talented, resourceful, and authoritative, but they use those talents to gain confidence with parents and access to kids to act on their own sexual interests.
Child abusers employ several different tactics to abuse children. Sometimes they abuse in such a subtle way that the child isn't aware the behavior is abusive. The abuser is constantly evaluating how much further they can push the child's defenses or boundaries for the next time, especially if the child doesn't seem to react or protest right away. Boundaries are limits, or lines that separate our personal space, emotions, and behaviors from others. Children, especially, are harmed when their boundaries are violated, regardless of whether it is intentional or not. Crossing them can often be part of a larger manipulative grooming process. This manipulative process can take time and includes physical, psychological, and community grooming intended to create an environment that traps children and lulls families and other safe adults into complacency. Physical grooming involves a physical progression of touches, beginning with a normal, acceptable touch that transitions to a more inappropriate or sexual touch over time that ultimately culminates in abuse. Abusers do this for two reasons: to desensitize the child or youth to inappropriate touch, and to confuse them about appropriate boundaries. Psychological grooming occurs when the abuser manipulates the child to form an emotional attachment, making the youth feel dependent on the adult and more isolated from others. They might give youth drugs or alcohol to make the child feel complicit, so the youth feels they were responsible for the abuse or contributed to it. Abusers may also coerce the child by threatening a loved one or performing actions to make the youth feel conflicted or helpless.
My abuser had told me what he was doing to my body was a normal way for two people to show love and affection for one another. I carried that shame around for years, but I came to realize I didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't my fault.
Community grooming provides the abusers with the environment needed to accomplish their goals. They build trust not just with the child, but with the child's support system as well. Abusers will work to ingratiate themselves into the community, developing relationships with adults and children for greater access to youth and protection against suspicion.
We all loved him. We trusted him and felt like he was exactly what our community needed. We were grateful seeing him take such an interest in our young people. And we brought kids who needed help to him. He told us that the most powerful moments were when he was one-on-one with youth, so they wouldn't have any distractions. What he said made sense. So we gave him space and we didn't challenge his methods, even though it was a little different from our rules. But it never occurred to us that he could be doing such awful things.
Coach said I'd had to stay after team practice and that he'd work with me one-on-one and give me some special pointers. He even got permission from my parents to let me practice with him at his house. I thought, great. But those after-school practices turned into something else. I tried to tell my parents, but they didn't get it. They said, when you work with someone great, like Coach, sometimes they're a little quirky, but I should stick with it because he was the best.
It is heartbreaking any time a child is a victim of abuse, and even more so when it involves an abuser within a church community, because to that child, the abuser represents the church and can represent God.
When the allegation came out about him, it completely divided us. He denied everything, but it all came out in the investigation. People were in denial that he could be abusing kids, so they accused the kids of lying and basically blamed them instead.
I'll never forget what happened when I attended my first VIRTUS training as a volunteer. The gentleman sitting right next to me was a fellow parent and a parishioner, a good guy. He kept shaking his head throughout the entire training and kind of muttering under his breath, telling me that this would never happen to my boys. That boy in the movie looks weak, and my boys aren't weak. He was essentially re-victimizing the child and perpetuating the social stigma of blaming the victim, which is something many people in our society continue to do.
Child abusers rely on their power as adults and their manipulation tactics to make it even more difficult for children to talk about the abuse. They convince children that adults won't believe them if they tell.
One time, I told her that I didn't want to go to tutoring after school anymore. And she told me that I better not tell my parents any lies about her. I knew my parents were going to believe her over me because she was a teacher and she's just helping me with my schoolwork. and she was so nice to them.
Molesters often leave victims feeling as though the victims themselves were to blame. The kids think that they somehow led the offender on, or that they used bad judgment, or that they were at fault because they liked the offender and the attention that the offender paid to them.
I was giving them an offer. They could run around naked if they want to. So if they chose it, it was their responsibility. So later on, if anything came up, then they would be hesitant to say anything because they'd feel guilty and responsible for what happened, even though it was all my fault.
Many child molesters have a lot of genuine skill in relating to children. They can easily find jobs and volunteer opportunities that give them access to kids. They imagine that they're providing kids with love and attention that they desperately need, and they rationalize away the terrible anguish and confusion that they're causing.
There are different types of abusers. Some abusers abuse multiple children, either because they have a sexual preference toward children or because they sexualize many or all their relationships. Other abusers have fewer victims, possibly even one, because the abuse is situational to a specific relationship or opportunity. They take advantage of opportunities in family and social relationships, acting out of loneliness, stress, entitlement, and unresolved sexual and developmental traumas. There are also abusers who will sexually victimize anyone at any opportunity in any deviant or sadistic way possible. However, for the types of preferential and situational abusers who specifically abuse children, their victimization is achieved through grooming and manipulation.
My victims thought that I was holding each one of them in a special regard. Every once in a while, some of my victims would get a little jealous of some other little girl that I was skating with because they thought that they was my special one.
Even though they were young, I treated them as though they were much older emotionally. And that was, of course, that was part of my rationale and my justification for telling myself it's not that bad. I really care about them. They love me, I love them.
It's not something you just get over. You just don't get over it. It's not that simple. I mean, I tried to kill myself. I thought that everyone that looked at me knew that my manhood was gone. I felt dirty, used, disgusting.
Kids and adults who are molested as children are more likely to have drug and alcohol problems, depression, anxiety, and other mental health difficulties. They're even more likely to have physical ailments.
Most often, children are abused by someone they or their family knows and trusts. This can create layers of complexity when attempting to disclose and present significant challenges for a child trying to heal. The effects can be profound and long-term on the survivor, their family, and even their community. Many victims do not disclose sexual abuse until they are adults. Survivors may experience a range of emotions, including hopelessness, fear, and anxiety. Shame, embarrassment, and self-blame are common reactions that can feel paralyzing and may prevent victims from seeking help from friends and family and reporting the abuse. Child sexual abuse can be stopped before it starts. In order to protect youth, we must separate the myths from the facts. Fact: child abusers cannot be identified solely based on the way they look. Abusers can look like or be anyone, male or female, or even a team of people working together, in addition to adults who are married with children of their own. Sex abusers look like your neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, the people with whom you work, family members, other trusted adults, and even other youth. Child sexual abuse happens in all income, racial, ethnic, and other demographic groups, and sex offenders do not fall into one certain category. Fact: most abusers are known and trusted by the victim and the victim's family. Studies estimate that the vast majority of child abuse, 89%, is performed by someone known and trusted, both by the victim and the victim's parents or guardians. This means that only 11% is performed by strangers. Fact: most sex abusers are not homosexuals. Research shows that an individual who identifies or behaves as someone with a same-sex attraction for adults does not pose a greater risk to the sexual abuse of children. Fact: celibate clergy are not more likely than others to abuse children. Promising celibacy or even taking a vow of chastity does not cause someone to abuse children, as most abusers have never made promises of celibacy. Fact: children rarely lie about sexual abuse. When disclosing about sexual abuse, over 95% of the time, children are telling the truth, and fewer than 5% of their allegations are intentionally false. If we understand that the majority of children are telling the truth when they speak about child sexual abuse, then we also need to know what to do and how to best respond.
The effects of abuse are complex, but healing is absolutely possible. For healing to occur, we need to provide the child with an environment that is safe and supportive, where people believe what they say. There is a detrimental message our society conveys to survivors of child sexual abuse, that it is best not to talk about what happened, that it is better to keep it to yourself. But the victim is never to blame. There is no shame in being a survivor, and it is never too late to talk about it with someone who can help.
My family and my community had a lot to do with that healing process. Healing came to me when my story was believed by my family, my friends, and my community. Listening, hearing, and believing when any person trusts you enough to tell you their painful story, now that's the start of the healing journey. I want every parent, every staff member, every employee, in fact, everyone in the community to know that you have a great opportunity to protect all children and even perhaps save their lives. You are an integral part of the prevention of sexual abuse.
And you, as a caring adult and a member of the community, can have a pivotal role in protecting all of our children in each of your environments. Learning more about the reality of child sexual abuse is just the beginning. We need to take what we've learned and use it to build safer environments for everyone, both in the church and everywhere in our lives involving children and youth. In this way, we are protecting all of God's children.